Okay, so this is part 2 of week 1 of our Raspberry Pi virtual camp. And so let's take a kind of an accounting before we get started of all the different things we have. All right, so of course we have the Raspberry Pi, all right? And we're gonna have another video later in the week that discusses all of the different ports. But today we're just gonna talk about the specific ports we're gonna be using to set up the Pi so we can get going here. So that's the Pi. Then we have the micro SD card that we formatted yesterday, which is right there. You can see it's quite small. It was, as I mentioned in our earlier video, that was the adapter I used, right? It went into that little tiny slot. You can probably see on the end there. We're not going to need that for today. So we have the SD card. We have a USB keyboard, which I probably should have dusted before I did this. We have a case for the Raspberry Pi, which isn't absolutely necessary, but it's intelligent to have one. It's a good idea. It just protects the Pi. If you don't use one, make sure that you really, make sure that your Pi is not in a place that's going to get broken. It can break, obviously. And we have a USB mouse. I use a ball mouse, but that's just me. You don't have to do that. As long as you have a USB mouse of some kind, that's fine, right? We have the AC adapter for the Pi. And then, of course, we have an HDMI monitor. So we're going to put all these things together, and then we're going to get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go put my Raspberry Pi in a case. So if you look on here, it's a little faint, and I hope the camera picks it up. At least the case I have, you can see printed on it where the different parts go. So this says Ethernet, USB, that's the symbol for USB, audio, HDMI. Cameraman, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. The AC adapter. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this down into the case. And I've just done it, see how I just talked about it, and it's that easy to do it backwards. Okay, and you don't want to, one of the keys to doing things like this is you don't want to force anything, right? Now this case is $10. It's not going to be awesome. There's going to be a little bit of wiggle in there, right? But that's okay, because I'm just looking to get some basic protection. So now you can see clearly the HDMI hookup that we're going to put the monitor in, the USB ports, where those go on the case, the Ethernet. Although this is a Raspberry Pi 3 Model B+, which actually means I won't need to use the Ethernet port because it has Wi-Fi capability. We'll talk more about that as we set up the Pi. And here's the port for, I'm sorry, that's the audio port. This is the port for the AC adapter, okay? So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the micro SD card, that little tiny card that we formatted yesterday, and this is the place on the Pi that it goes into. And again, don't force anything. It should just slide really easily into place, and I believe it's fully in. Okay, so now that's together. The case is together, and we have the micro SD card in it. Now, it's good to have a surge protector or power strip readily accessible. So what I'm going to do next is I'm not going to plug this into power yet. I'm going to plug in my monitor and all my other peripherals. Okay, so, and that's just something, you just look for the HDMI port on your given monitor. Each monitor will have a slightly different setup. So I'm going to plug that in there, and then I'm going to take the other side of the cable, and I'm going to plug it into the HDMI port. Then I'm going to take the plug for the monitor, and plug it into the back of the monitor as well. Again, the configuration on a given monitor will be slightly different. I never understood how wires tangle themselves up. Somewhere there must be physicists that are studying this, how they move of their own accord and tangle themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. Oops, and I've almost just missed the chair, which probably would have been a source of great fun for you all, and maybe me, depending on how hard I hit the ground. So now I'm going to plug in my mouse. And again, there are 4 USB ports on the Pi. Go ahead and plug that in. And now I'm going to plug in my keyboard. Okay. And just organize that as you would. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in the AC adapter. So I'm going to plug that into this port here. You'll see it matches. Okay? And then I'm going to plug that into my power strip. Okay, now you'll see these lights go on as that happens. And you'll see the screen gives this rainbow color. And it's going to do this set of things here. All right, now you want to go ahead and put the language to whatever you're using. I'm using English US. All right, and notice it gives us 2 possible things to install. You have Raspbian, which is what we're going to use, and LibreElec. So we're not going to use that today, so don't even worry about that. Go ahead and, you zoomed in on this? Yeah. Go ahead and click on Raspbian and click install. And it will say, this will install the selected operating systems. All existing data on the drive will be overwritten, including any OSs that are already installed. You're going to hit yes. And you basically just wait as Raspbian is set up. Again, this has all been automated for you, or just about everything's been automated to make it as easy as possible. And it will take a little bit of time, even though the Raspberry 3 has a quad-core chip. It is an ARM processor, which again in that video later, there'll be videos later in the week that discuss that. And so it doesn't process quite as quickly as your regular computer will. And while we're waiting, this is probably a good time to talk about why we're using the Pi. So we're not using the Pi to have some sort of power computer, some sort of thing that we're going to game on, or probably not use it for video editing. We're using the Pi to force us effectively to use the computer in creative and analytic ways that cause us to actually work through and solve problems and learn more about computing in the process. So perhaps more than anything, or at least first, the Pi is an exceptional teaching tool to get you to actually think about what's going on in the computer and to be able to use it effectively. And then we're going to be able to do you'll be able to do a lot of cool projects with the Pi. In this camp, we're going to go through some basic programming, basic methods of using the Pi or approaches to the Pi, and then subsequent camps and classes, we're going to discuss how you can do really awesome projects like robotics, weather stations, and all sorts of interesting things that you can do that you can't as easily do with your regular computer. And so we'll give that a second, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so now we're coming closer to the end. It's at 96% now. I hope you grab yourself a cup of coffee or a glass of milk. I suppose a lot of you don't drink coffee. And I think my son, who's holding the camera, just said, I do. So now it's at 100%. And we're almost there. Wait for it. Okay, so now we see it says OS installed successfully. Hit OK. And now it's effectively rebooting, restarting itself. And there's our Raspberry Pi desktop. So that's how we install Raspberry Pi. And in the next video, we will discuss the configuration and setup of the software on Raspberry Pi so we can start with our next activities. Take care.